All right, welcome back to OK Computer. This is our Funders and Founders series brought to you by our friends at RBC Capital. I have a very good friend of mine who I potted with on many occasions. That would be Jeff Richards. He's managing partner at Notable Capital. And Jeff, when I said to you, I'd love for you to be involved in this series, do you have anybody that's really interesting that kind of just fits that perfect kind of founder sort of story and the sort of thing that attracts you? And I know that you have many, but you're like, I got a guy that you got to meet, and his name is Garrett Lord, and he is the CEO, founder of Handshake. Garrett, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hey, listen, I know
you're right, Dan. That was my reaction.
Yeah,
I got a guy.
You got a guy, but part of this series is interesting. Garrett, just so you know, I mean, Jeff and I have had lots of conversations in front of mics here. You've seen Jeff do a lot of great work on CNBC. He's talking about the environment. He's talking about his industry views. He's talking about, some companies that are maybe coming public and this and that or whatever. And so it's not often, though, for me that I have the opportunity to talk to somebody like Jeff with a founder of a company that they have backed. He led your Series D round, I think back in late 19 or early 2020. He's been involved with the board. So one of the reasons that we want to do it this way, we want to talk a little bit about that relationship. Obviously, the origin story of the company and you as a founder is really interesting to us, but then what attracted to an investor like Jeff to the story is also really good stuff too. And then I just kind of see you guys interact a little bit on this thing. So let's start a little bit. Like Garrett, the story of Handshake is really the story about opportunities. It's a mission-driven company that you built from scratch based on your own personal circumstances. Talk to us a little bit about it, because this is not a company that I have spent a lot of time on or actually heard about until very recently.
Yeah. So the background of our business, I think the focus is really around trying to create an impact on young folks launching their way into their career, or folks trying to jumpstart their career or restart their career. And the origin story I grew up in a working class family in Michigan and went to community college for 2 years, transferred up from a community college to a 4-year institution. And it was there at this rural institution, basically in the middle of nowhere, like it's the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, 8 hours from Chicago, 350 inches of snowfall a year, pretty remote school, that I really experienced a lot of my friends and myself struggling to break out to find internships and jobs. And so much of that, navigating that process from college to career, is really about kind of who you know or who your parents know. And my parents didn't really know anyone in these different career paths. My dad we thought iBanking was internet banking. I'd never really been to Silicon Valley or New York before. And there's huge advantages that students face based on socioeconomic class and what school you go to. And so Handshake, kind of our origin story, was really trying to make an impact on this societal problem of the opportunity gap and helping raise awareness for students around both access to opportunities that most schools don't have, and also information around career paths, which is equally as important. Understanding, you starting marketing, like what do you do with that marketing degree? What does a day in the life look like of a near peer like yourself? And so I'm really proud to say that almost 50% of college students in America found their first job on Handshake last year, because of this amazing network that we built out with students and universities and employers.
Was there, Garrett, an incumbent that you were, let's say, using, you and some of your peers, that you were saying, okay, this is kind of useful, but doesn't really serve me particularly well? And were you just basically saying, they kind of scratched the surface here, but this thing that I need has not been built yet, and I want to go out there and do it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want to follow your uncle who drives a Buick, you could probably do it on LinkedIn. And, but the way that college students navigate this career search process, they don't have networks, right? Like we like to say, LinkedIn's a lot about your past and Handshake's about your future. And then, the large incumbent, I mean, these are huge, great companies, right? LinkedIn and Indeed. But when you're on Indeed, the first thing you see is it's a search box. It's like what are you looking for? And it's like, I actually am a sophomore, junior. Like, what am I looking for, right? It's about, you're trying to provide discovery opportunities for students to get inspired and learn what near peers are doing. And so Handshake's taking a very different approach of helping folks that don't have experience build confidence and embark on this process.
Yeah, Jeff, you guys have obviously been investing in companies that are doing these kind of, like these phases of digitization of all sorts of things. And the idea of democratizing, something is probably really attractive to you. When did you, kind of learn about Handshake, what drew you to the company. I'm sure Garrett had a whole host. Listen, Garrett, and I've read a lot about you. I think you're being really modest about kind of where you came from and what you had to overcome to get where you did. And I read some of the stories about internships that you got on your own and how you succeeded there and competed with kids that were going to like really fancy schools and were probably born on third and thought they hit a triple. And I'm sure that's been a big driving force. Jeff and I know a little bit about that by getting to Ivy League schools because you had a good jump shot. I had a good BTB on the lax field, that sort of thing. But Jeff, when did you figure out that Handshake was onto something, Garrett in particular?
Yeah, I think, look, it's a great story. And for investors in our business, it's a very long-term business, right? As venture capitalists, we're investing in companies usually for 7 to 10 years, even more often. And so what you love is an opportunity to get to know a founder early and take your time to get to know that founder. We went through a phase in 21 and 22 and 23 where that sort of went out the window and people were throwing money at anything that moves. And we're back now to a mode where we are taking the time to get to know founders. If you wind back the clock, 2000, I think 17 or 18 time window, I was introduced to Garrett by Eric Fang, who had led Garrett's Series A when he was at Kleiner Perkins. And I had met Eric at a prior company called Flipboard, where he was CTO. And he introduced me to Garrett and said, I think you're going to love this guy. There's a big vision and a great story here. But to be fair, at the time, it was really early. It was, probably close to no revenue. And Garrett and John and the rest of the team were really just getting started. But Garrett, to the point he just made to you, he had a really big vision, which is the way that colleges and universities have been helping kids find jobs and the way corporate recruiters have been going after these kids is frankly hasn't changed much. I graduated from college in the mid 90s and it hadn't changed much. It was still a lot of paper and pencil and a lot of about who you knew. And he said, I want to go out and I want to change that. I want to get all the major schools and all the schools in the country on our platform. I want to get all the major employers on our platform. And I want to change the way this whole industry works. I want to give kids at every school in the country a shot to work at a Goldman Sachs or a Salesforce or a Microsoft. And, fast forward 7-8 years later, he's done that. Garrett can share some of the specifics with you, but it also along the way, what I think people realize is how valuable and lucrative this category is. I was one of the first 10,000 users of LinkedIn. And so I saw LinkedIn in its very, very, very early and primitive days. LinkedIn bought or Microsoft bought LinkedIn for, I think, around 25 billion a few years ago. And today, analysts estimate LinkedIn's worth around 75 billion. So this category is enormous. It's really valuable. It's really important to our economy and frankly, the global economy. And what Garrett and the team have done at Handshake is just super impressive. And as you mentioned, Dan, not a lot of people know about it, but I will tell you who knows about it. Every kid in college. When you hop onto a college campus today, I'm lucky enough to have a sophomore. And one of the first things that many schools in the country do now is they say, hey, set up a Handshake profile. That's how you're going to find internships. That's how you're going to find jobs. And Garrett can tell you a little bit more about the product roadmap and some of the things they've launched in the last few months. But it's also how you can communicate with employers and communicate with alumni and learn more about the careers and opportunities that are out there in front of you. So it's been amazing to be a part of. And as you mentioned, a big part of the draw for me was just meeting Garrett. We've gotten to know each other very well personally over the years, spent time mountain biking in Tahoe and skiing in Utah. And the guy's just an animal and the kind of founder that we love to back.
Garrett, tell me a little bit about like some of the relationships. Again, Jeff just mentioned, and again, I have a sophomore in college also, and she's maybe not that career-minded just yet. So hopefully she's going to have a Handshake account very soon. But like when you think about partnering with educational institutions, with companies, what are some of, give us the landscape here, and then actually give us some numbers, because the numbers are kind of staggering on the corporate side, and then of all sorts of different academic institutions.
Okay, so if you just zoom out a little bit, like universities are really under a lot of pressure to demonstrate outcomes and to kind of quantify the value of a degree. And they're focused on helping propel their students into great career paths. And then they're being asked to measure that. And so every university faces this standard challenge, and universities generally are pretty resource constrained in the way that they can engage their students in that process around the academic journey. And so, fast forward from when Handshake got started, when we grew into higher education faster than any company in history has. Like, we now represent around 1,500 institutions in the country. 92% of the top 500 universities in the country use Handshake. We also are a very large provider of with community colleges as well, both pre-professional programs. We have skill building programs in the network. So if your job is educating or helping folks learn skills or jumpstart their career, generally these universities need to be able to bring an employer network to bear. And that's what Handshake's really strong at. We have over 900,000 companies that use Handshake, 100% of the Fortune 500. If you're hiring from college or community college in America today, you're most likely using Handshake. And then the students, Handshake's just a verb. Like, you don't really have to educate them much. Like 75% of students in America have access to Handshake. Most of them are on it in all types of engagement patterns. And students use it for a lot of different purposes. But that's kind of the three-sided nature of the network: the universities, the students, and the employers.
Yeah, so when you talk about three-sided network, that probably gets people like Jeff kind of excited a little bit from an investor standpoint. Jeff, talk to me what attracted you to this model. You've been very familiar with marketplaces in general and how they've evolved over the last 20 years, on the internet. And again, this seems like one that underserved for this category. And it seems like it's just kind of, and it's not just like a one-time use, because I know a lot of 20-somethings, and I know a lot of 20-somethings who really don't like the jobs that they're in right now and probably oftentimes feel a bit stuck. So talk to me a little bit about how you feel about the marketplace, and you get a good look at some of the data and how this company is growing. I'm just curious how you're thinking about it.
Well, I think, it makes me think of the time, Garrett, you probably remember when you came in and pitched our team in person. We happened to be having a global offsite and we had about 15 people in the room, and Garrett came in, pitched us in person. And I'll never forget, at the end of the meeting, the partner said, "How much money can we invest in this company?" Which doesn't happen very often. But, what you saw at the time, and again, this is 6-7 years ago, was Garrett describing an opportunity where the near-term opportunity was obviously to change the way that campus recruiting and hiring and career pathing happens for kids in college. And there's roughly 3.5 to 4 million kids a year that graduate from high school and go into some sort of post-secondary education, college, community college, et cetera. But the really big vision that Garrett outlined for us, and we always love companies where there's hey, this is what we're going to do for the next 3 to 5 years, but long-term, we have this really big vision to do X. And what Garrett outlined for us was, as you mentioned, Dan, not only kids in college, but how do we get every kid that's out of college on our platform and using this as the primary way that they learn about careers, they network with alumni, we're moving into a world where a degree means something, but so do the skills that you have and the things that you've accomplished. And, back when I graduated from college, there were firms like Goldman and Accenture, or then called Anderson, that would come on campus and recruit kids. But, they were only going to 3 or 4 campuses. Today, those same companies are going on Handshake and getting to meet thousands of kids who are at campuses all over the country and frankly, all over the world. And they're evaluating them based on their skills, based on their accomplishments, based on things that they've actually done. They might have started a business. They might have learned computer science on their own. So how do you expose the value of these kids and these people as humans beyond the degree and the name brand where they're coming from? I think that's a lot of what Garrett has really done here, is change the way the industry thinks and not just focus on the name brand of where you graduated and the degree that you got, but who are you as a person and what kind of potential do you have? And for us, again, I gave you the data point on valuation of LinkedIn, but this is also, we love to back companies where you're not even necessarily taking market share, you're expanding the market. Right. And, you heard obviously the hot company of the day is NVIDIA and Jensen Huang talking about they're not taking share, they're expanding a market. And I think what you're seeing is Handshake do that as well. These are opportunities that weren't there previously. And I think if you roll the clock forward in 10 years, Garrett and the team will be finding ways to create opportunities in this market for job seekers, for employers, for colleges. One of the things that I always think about is you've got a very limited number of people that can go to a certain college and earn a certain degree. How do we open that up? How do we make that broader so more people have those opportunities? There are certainly kids that are being undiscovered and not, I live in California. I can tell you right now, as we go through the admissions process, there are unbelievable kids that aren't even getting into UC and UC State schools that should be. Well, why aren't those programs larger? And I think Handshake can potentially play a role there. So short answer to your question, big market opportunity that already existed, great team going after it, and a big vision over the long run that we thought could keep expanding over a 10, 20-year period.
I think the case that makes it so clear is the average student that graduates after college, they transition jobs 3 times in their first 5 years. And oftentimes, like when you think about that early career trajectory, like it's your major didn't really define your career in the vast majority of situations with students in America today. And so you're actually transitioning industries twice in your first 5 years too. And so this idea that you like have a network built up, well, if you have a network built up in recruiting and then you want to move to sales, so like how do you break into sales? How do you become an SDR? How do you become a BDR? How do you break into marketing? Like what Handshake's really great at doing is helping people launch, jumpstart, restart, or start their career and understand what's out there in these career paths and who are near peers they can talk to. There's this, I mean, maybe just to bring it to life with like a student story, there's one of my favorites. It's like there's a student named Wes Yates when Jeff was talking about companies recruiting at larger scale, like the company here that Wes was hired by is Raytheon. You know, if you think about like Raytheon's program and how they hired before, they could physically only visit like 15 or 25 schools. And then, you know, not to call Jeff old, but like he said it earlier, like nothing changed, right? Like the company set up a tablecloth with a logo, they put their company polo on with a little name tag, they sit in a stuffy gymnasium and like hope people know what Raytheon does and walk up. Well, fast forward to what Raytheon does in 2024 is like they hired Wes. And the example of hiring Wes is they're actually sending messages out across the network looking for like organizational affiliations, GPAs, what classes did you take? They identified Wes at Embry-Riddle University, which is now one of their core institutions. They sent him an invite to attend an event with a couple other alumni from Raytheon who are young employees of the company, engaging in kind of like an ask me anything, what's it like in a day in life at Raytheon. He went to the event. They were really impressed with his resume. They then invited him out, flew him out from the event onto their headquarters and hired him. And like, that's an example of, you know, historically pre-Handshake, that would have never been possible. Wes wouldn't have known about the Raytheon opportunities, the corporate, you know, web page where the job postings wouldn't have been relatable. So Handshake's really able to connect the dots at like the fact that talent is everywhere, right? And an opportunity really isn't. Opportunity is not evenly distributed. And there are smart people at every university in the country. I know we got 2 Ivy League guys on the call, but there are smart kids even at Michigan Tech.
I'd say 2 things I'd love for you to share here with Dan and with the audience is one, a couple more examples of some of the cool things that employers are doing, because I think that market has changed so much in the last 5 years, you know, even with COVID sort of changing the dynamic of how people even thought about recruiting, because they used to recruit for specific locations and they used to do it on campus. That all went out the window. Everybody started doing virtual recruiting. They were open to people working all over the country, all over the world. Just talk little bit about that and maybe give a couple of examples of employers. And the second thing is I want to talk about the mobile app. I want to talk about what you guys are doing to expand the reach and engagement with students and post-grad kids that are on Handshake. So maybe let's first talk about employers, because it's pretty exciting.
Like if you think about digital transformation and what's happened in most companies with the advent of incredible software tools over the last 20 years, like most of modern enterprises today operate in a much different way than a HR and talent acquisition team. Like HR and talent acquisition is like the last part of a company to have been really touched by technology. And what that actually means is like the idea that there's like a quantitative understanding of how much it costs to hire talent and where you're actually seeing success from, and modern workflow tools for recruiters that actually help them improve their productivity. Like that is non-existent in the world of early talent recruiting, in hiring people out of college, hiring people right after college. And what Handshake's doing is really helping companies become far more efficient and effective at hiring talent on time and at lower costs across America. Additionally, like when you think about just the fairness aspect as well, like companies are really shifting towards a skill-based hiring approach, which is really trying to find and identify, you know, if you're a Midwest manufacturing firm, data science does not look like data science at Facebook. You know, you're not hiring PhD physics majors, you know, to write clustering algorithms and write their own neural nets for, you know, data science applications. Like you literally need to know how to do like a pivot table in Excel, right? And so as a Midwest manufacturing firm, like how do you identify maybe a marketing major who's taken a data science class on campus or actually might understand what SQL is and how SQL can apply inside the enterprise? And then students are also getting smarter as well around like, what are the skills that employers are looking for? The currency on Handshake that is continuing to grow is like, how many companies are following me? How many companies are messaging me? Like, what really causes Handshake to blow up on campus is upperclassmen telling underclassmen and alumni telling upperclassmen, you got to be on Handshake if you want to be seen by these companies. It's very similar to most kind of modern social media products, and the fact that there's a kind of a fear of missing out, and they want to understand how they're following against their pack, maybe in their sorority or their major.
You see the employment data every month the way I do. We are at full employment. We're at 50 years low. It's become a really competitive environment. So no matter what sort of skill level you're at and what you're looking to do, it's become a fairly in demand sort of environment. But there's certain pockets though also, if you start breaking down some of the data and employment where certain groups are being massively underrepresented. And so I'm just curious, like, give us a sense of kind of the current environment right now and how you see growth and how it's playing into this kind of 50-year low unemployment rate sort of environment that we're in.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look back over the last 18 months, I mean, there's been a lot of volatility around hiring and what companies, I think when you're looking at it from the outside, what people fail to realize is that there are actually companies that are contracting immensely, and there are actually companies that are growing very quickly. So pretty much a lot of companies are approaching us right now because they're trying to hire more machine learning and AI talent inside of their companies, right? And that's across the enterprise. And you look at, industries like banking that is actually struggling more, whereas there are other industries that are growing. And so really where Handshake's growth has come from, we're doing over $100 million as a business and growing at a healthy clip, is helping identify really the sectors that are growing right now. And the easiest way to do that is like who has job openings and who's hiring. And that's actually pretty easy data to get. And when we're able to get to the right level of leader, a VP of talent acquisition or a CHRO or an engineering director that's trying to hire and showcase our audience to them, Handshake's a pretty easy sale.
Yeah, and Dan, I'd add a couple of things there. I think if you look broadly, and I know a lot of your audience are public investors or follow the public markets pretty closely, you look at this sort of like employment, hiring, HR tech universe in 23 and 22, most of the companies were flat to down. It just wasn't, we went through the whole sort of Zuckerberg right sizing, get lean mode, particularly in tech, where you've seen hundreds of thousands of people laid off. I think to Garrett's point, what you're also seeing is other industries where they're just trying to put on a serious hiring effort around AI and ML and some of these newer skill sets. And so it's such a really interesting and dynamic part of the economy to be involved in. We have exposure to it through Handshake. I'm also on the board of companies that also operate in the SMB space like Homebase, where we see this. I think there are going to be massive changes in the labor pool in the United States and the dynamics. Obviously, one of the reasons unemployment has been low for so many years now is we've had a structural shift. People left the workforce, got a lot of conversations and topics around immigration. But I think the thing that is very cool about where Garrett and the Handshake team are playing is if you are a company that is betting on the future, you can't just retrench, curl up in a ball and say, we're not going to hire anybody. You either have to make changes and swap out some of your old labor force for new people who've got the AI and ML skills or some of these other skill sets that they're going to need in the future, or you've just got to be aggressively hiring across the board. But you can't, you just can't retrench. And it's just going to be a really interesting place to play. I think Garrett and the team are going to be sitting right in the center of that, particularly as they start to see kids that are coming into school. Maybe they're picking up a minor in CS. Maybe they've got core math skills, but haven't started to focus on CS. Or maybe they're just a lowly liberal arts major like me, who eventually wants to get into tech anyhow. And they can learn those skills over time, either on their own or in a post-grad environment. It's just going to be such a dynamic and important part of our economy for the next 5 to 10 years. I tweeted out a few months ago, when we look at the economy and the labor pool in the US, I still think we're using checkers to evaluate a game of chess. I think there's just a massive set of changes that are taking place. And, companies like Handshake are on the front of that and helping employers figure it out, helping the colleges and universities figure it out, and frankly, helping the students figure it out.
Well, let's talk about the student experience, because this is something that I have an 18-year-old and I have a 20-year-old, and they've basically grown up with iPhones in their hands. They're very, their whole world is about the apps that are on their iPhones. And, I saw, Garrett, that you guys did a big relaunch of the experience, and you just use the term FOMO, that a lot of these students have who are out there looking for jobs. So talk to us about like what informed some of the changes that you made, and what are some of the like kind of experiences that you think are very healthy, you know what I mean, to kind of pursue career interest, learn about those different careers, evaluate different opportunities, because it seems like this is something that's been a big focus over the last couple of years, especially as there's been a huge push post-COVID, obviously, to more virtual hiring experiences.
I think what guides a lot of our roadmap is really talking to students and trying to understand what are the problems that they're facing and what do they want to see out of Handshake. And when you talk to students in America today, like a lot of what they're trying to figure out sophomore year, junior year, even 1 or 2 years after college is where is my fit in this professional world of work? And how does my skills and passions and interests align in a career path? And how can I find fulfillment in that career path? And that's really, as you might imagine, as a 22-year-old or 26-year-old, like a really daunting process. And so what drives a lot of our roadmap is around helping students learn from near peers and young professionals and really demystifying what it means to navigate into different paths. And so what that actually looks like on Handshake is it's a feed of short form video content and text content and other student content, really sharing across. Soon we're actually going to be introducing groups. Right now, there's actually kind of some permutations around groups, but the students are really focused on, really trying to understand what good looks like. How do I get prepared? I mean, there's almost a pipeline, right? You think about it as like, I build a resume, I build a cover letter, and then I define what companies I'm going to apply to. What is it like to work in that company? What's the mission of this business? What's the culture like? And so much of what students are doing is trying to figure that out on Handshake. And that's where a lot of our engagement comes from.
Garrett, you mentioned kids in their 20s trying to figure out their career path, and yours has been interesting because you started Handshake when you were in college. Can you just talk a little bit about, you and I have talked a lot about just your experience as a founder and learning, sort of learning how to scale a business as a CEO. Talk a little about what that journey's been like for you over the last, I guess it's almost 10 years now.
I think about it all the time. It's like you have to reinvent yourself like every 6 months for what the business needs a year from now. And at first, that's really hard to take in so much feedback and try to reinvent yourself and really put in the self-work to make that happen. And, I remember when I had to figure out enterprise sales and I went to Men's Warehouse and bought a sport coat and started flying around the country talking to companies, right? But I've been very fortunate to be surrounded by incredible teammates and incredible executives, like from pretty early on, that believed in this mission and believed in our ability to seize this opportunity that exists around the mission. And I think so much of what has helped grow me as leader is the folks around the business, both in the business and around the business, like yourself, our board, my executive team, and in particular, the first kind of big leader we hired, a gentleman named Jonathan Stoll, was super influential at really helping me put together what I needed to be doing in order to keep pace with the opportunity ahead.
Yeah, you have a great exec team, and you have since the very early days. And one thing I would mention, we don't need to go into it in depth, Dan, but I've used Garrett as a case study for other founders many times on how to leverage your board to interview and recruit candidates. Garrett will, text me, hey, I'm trying to land this new person into this role. The recruiting team will send a whole email with the background. Here's what we want you to focus on. Here's the selling points. The follow-up is immediate. I do the Zoom with the candidate, and an hour later, I get an email. What did you think? You'd be amazed how many private companies and probably even some public don't even do that. They don't do the prep. They don't do the follow-up. And candidates notice, right? The candidates feel that. They feel that Garrett wants them on the team. He's put them in front of some of his key board members and people who have known him since the early days. And then obviously part of our job is to help sell the long-term 5-10 year opportunity for the company. So Garrett, we don't need to spend a ton of time on it, but you guys are amazing at that. And I think it's one of the reasons why the team at Handshake is so strong.
Well, Garrett, it's interesting. And again, we've had a handful of these conversations so far in the Funders and Founders series. And when I look at the sorts of firms that have backed you, obviously including Jeff's, like you have a tremendous amount of talent on your board and the people close to it, and I'm sure some founders take advantage, to Jeff's point, more than others in that regard, to all those sorts of resources. You've mentioned this a couple times since we've been speaking. Now, you're just some guy from Michigan, and this and that, whatever. What has that meant to you to have access to some of these folks who have invested in some of the most transformative tech companies over the last, call it 40 years? It must be like a bit of a dream come true, if you will, for any entrepreneur.
I think I've kind of reset the expectations in my family for what was even possible in like life. Like it's been hugely gratifying, and we're super proud. And I think the other interesting story I think about being in this position as a CEO is like, it's pretty rare for so many folks to just be pouring into you, right? Like I have almost an unfair advantage to be able to grow, because so many folks are betting on me and betting on the company, and they're very selfless with their time. Like I have incredible advisors and incredible friends of the company that I can call for and get on the phone and ask questions about really anything, and never feel dumb or never feel like uh, that they're not available or that they don't care. And I think that helps me really arrive at the right answers, or solve tricky problems, or figure out how to structure the team or the operating cadence, or set goals, or come up with company strat, or manage a sales team in a way that is super unique. And I think that's also really unique about Silicon Valley and San Francisco in particular, where like the culture here is one where, you always treat everyone with a ton of respect, because you never know who's going to be the next Patrick at Stripe or the next Brian at Airbnb. And so everyone is so willing to share advice. And I love that.
Well, Garrett, I'm going to give you the last word, because I'm very appreciative to Jeff for introducing us and giving us the opportunity to have this conversation. And I love to meet founders like yourself who are literally mission driven, and it's born out of something of your own experience and where you come from. And it seems like the culture that you built at Handshake is something that kind of permeates through the product that you built and how you serve your customers on every which way you interact with your customers and the like. So I just would love to hear like what you are most excited about as you think about whether it be the product, the opportunity that you have working, within an industry where right now it seems like, you're kind of really running away with it, but you recognize the fact that there will be competition. The more successful you are, they're coming after you. So I'm just curious, what excites you right now about the opportunity that you have?
I think something that's really been exciting me lately is the opportunity to use LLMs and AI to help students build a personalized conversational like career co-pilot. What really helps students and young professionals navigate the career is being able to talk to like mentors and advisors and be able to have really honest and vulnerable conversations around these different trade-offs and decisions. And today, for so many millions and millions of students in America, they don't, many of the first generation college students don't have anyone that's ever worked a job that required a college degree. Or for somebody like my sister who was, felt totally paralyzed when she hated her first job and did not know what to do next. And it felt like she couldn't really talk to anyone about it. So what I think I'm most excited about with Handshake is I think continuing on this mission of helping people find this fulfillment and finding the right career path that matches their interests and their passions that they feel like they can be successful at. I mean, it feels really great in life to feel like you're doing something and you're succeeding at it.
Well, I think you nailed our next topic, Garrett. When you come back on the pod here, we're going to see how you guys are using LLMs and co-pilots to kind of solve for better outcomes for, I guess, everybody involved. And I think that's probably something that a lot of our audience would be very interested in hearing about. All right, Jeff Richards, Garrett Lord, I appreciate you guys joining us on the pod. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Garrett.